Hi, this is John Mundy, and this is what we call Miracles in Manhattan. Today is December the 10th, 2017. Our topic for today is the second half of the Psychotherapy Pamphlet, Psychotherapy Purpose, Process, and Practice, which was scribed by Dr. Helen Schuckman, written down in early 1975. It was the first thing that she gave me. In fact, she called me in April of 75 and said, I have something for you. And I think I told you last time that she invited me to come over to Ken Wapnick's apartment, which was very near here, and gave me the manuscript, and that was my introduction to A Course in Miracles, which it was interesting because Ken and Bill were thinking it was going to be something different. They were looking for something different, and when Ken read it, he said, well, this is just like the Course. And it is just like the Course because what it's about in the long run is about healing the mind. And interestingly enough, what it's about healing the mind of is the therapist, not the patient, not the client. The idea being that a healed mind helps to heal other minds. But that mind needs to be healed in order to provide the right kind of direction, right? There's a point which we'll get to a little bit later where it says that the therapist should be at least a little bit ahead. You know, I can remember all the years that I taught university and college classes, and when you would teach a new subject, you had to be a little bit ahead of the students, always, but that's the way it works. But this is talking about mental health in this particular case, healthy-mindedness, right? I was just saying to the class, but I also want to say to people who are watching this on YouTube that you can go to our website, which is miraclesmagazine.org, and look up, we're sponsoring a conference the weekend of Columbus Day. It's either 3 or 4 days, depending on how much you want to spend, whether you Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. If you want to take the time to be there, we've got a wonderful lineup of people that are going to be there as presenters. And it's also just going to be a social time. We have the music is being led by Roger Mock, who is the music director from Unity Church in Albany. I'm also open and looking for, we don't have a pianist. Kind of really like to have a pianist in addition to Roger with his guitar. Anybody know anybody like that? Well, let me know. Jeff would be wonderful. I'm also looking at this guy sitting on the front row here. Mark. Do any of you ever watch American Pickers, the show? He writes the score for that. Plus, right? Yeah. So it is fun, right? One more thing that's sort of interesting that's been going on. I ask you to read the introduction, my article in the November-December issue of Miracles magazine. Miracles is changing a little bit. One of the ways that we're changing beginning in January is that we're going to be opening more to a course of love in addition to a course in miracles. And in fact, as we're turning over 16 pages in each issue to a course of love. And I explain in some detail why we've become more open to that and about that kind of sharing. The analogy which I like to give, which I really came from John Mark Stroud. I don't know whether anybody knows John Mark Stroud or not. But he said that if you take, say, the Bhagavad Gita, or I list in here other inspired works that came through people like Emanuel Swedenborg or a whole variety of different, Teresa of Avila, etc., Richard Bach. I keep running down the list. Tom Carpenter, Brent Haskell, etc., all say that they received, this was like a gift for them. And so that information has been very valuable too. I've not, the Course in Miracles is core. I mean, the Course in Miracles is central to my studies, has been for 42 years, and it will be always, I know. But at the same time, prior to the Course, I was studying mysticism and what the mystics had to say. And there's, in particular, there's a group of kind of Hindu mystics that would have included Wee Woo Wee, who some of you may not know of, who was actually an English gentleman who dropped everything and left England and went and studied with Ramana Maharshi and started writing with the pseudonym Wee Woo Wee, which is a Taoist word which means non-meddlesome action. But he was writing about non-dualism. Non-dualism is basic to understanding the Course in Miracles. Nasargadatta, also Ramesh Belkazar. These are all teachers who are talking about non-dualism, and the Course in Miracles is talking about non-dualism as well. So you'll understand. We'll be talking more about that. But so inspiration is for all. That kind of is something that comes from A Course in Miracles. Actually, last time we were here, Mary, who was sitting right there where Keith was sitting, asked a question that I didn't feel as though I had answered sufficiently. I got thinking about it later on. The question is, and it's really a big question, is who is Charlie the chooser? I mean, who is the decider? It's really the question is whose voice are we listening to? But then the question behind that question is who's listening? I mean, is it the ego? There is this thing that we call an ego, and the answer to that is, well, yes, very often that is what it is. But then, as we all know, the Course is very clear that's not who you are. In truth or in reality, that's who you are within the context of a dream or in the context of an illusion. So there's another part to you, which is the real part, but we often seem to be very cut off from that. Another word that we could use is self. Actually, you can see for this conference that we have coming up in October that the title that I've given to the whole conference is From Selfishness to Self-fullness. So we're really moving away from the ego's selfishness to the idea of really being of one mind, literally of one mind, and literally connected, rather than looking for problems and looking for difficulties and looking to project our own thoughts and our feelings out onto the world. Okay. So when anybody would approach Ramana Maharshi and ask him a question, very often he would start by saying, who wants to know? In other words, who's asking the question? That's the interesting question. The question is who's asking the question, and where is the question coming from? Now, the good news in terms of the Course, we'll be seeing this as we go through these slides today, is that the Course says there's no one here in whom the light has gone out completely, and that would be true for absolutely every soul. There's no matter how dark it may appear, and we're going to look at a dark soul here in just a moment, namely Edgar Allan Poe, who, I don't know if some of you watched the production that was done about him by PBS on American Masters a month or so ago, but it really showed somebody who was willing to look at the dark side. I mean, to really go within as well as be, we'll talk about that more when we get to it. But you got to do that. one of the major problems we have with this thing that's called an ego is denial. And it's not looking. And it's repression. Freud really got that right. I mean, Freud really understood that we repress, we don't look. And of course, in Miracles, as I've said several times in reference to Ken, one of the big emphasis is upon looking. You've got to look. You've got to look at your own irresponsibility. You've got to look at things that happen in your life. And when things come up in our lives that we say, well, I never asked for this, or why did this have to happen? The Course is very clear. It says, that this is a lesson. There is something that you're here to learn, and it doesn't make any difference how big it is. Your job is still one of accepting responsibility for whatever it is, because that's the only, you can't go blaming the world, because that's what the ego likes to do. The ego loves to blame the world. In fact, that's what we watch the news. I mean, actually, don't watch the news, but I mean, if you watch the news, you see that's what it's about. It's about finding the problem out there, and there's always someone to blame. The Course talks about that in terms of what it calls making the error real. Now, we're not saying that there's not an error, and we're not even saying that sometimes we need to look at that. But mostly what the Course is asking us to do is to look at it inside me, right, before I go saying that it's out there. Looking at it, just seeing it outside in the world, keeps me from looking inside and seeing what's really going on yet a deeper level. So this is why this is really deep work, and why this is really, it's hard work, because actually we don't want to be responsible. We don't want to have to deal with the issues that come up in our lives, and yet if we don't, then we continue to remain in this foggy place where nothing seems to get done. Yes, you got the mic.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
I've been studying psychopathy,
Okay.
and what got me into that is I believe everyone has a spark, the Holy Spirit, the Christ mind, and psychopaths are born without certain things. Parts of their brains missing, and they have no empathy, and they have no conscience. And I've been trying to figure out in my mind. What would the Course say
I
about
understand
that?
the question.
Yeah.
Okay. You'll understand your question, I suppose, as well, right? It's a very interesting question in terms of the Course, because again, the Course said there's no one in whom the light has gone out completely. Okay. So even in the case of a psychopath, we could say that maybe it's like the ego's got 99% control, but there still remains this, what the Course calls the little spark, this possibility that they could be reached. Now keep in mind, we talked a couple of sessions back about a friend of mine, someone that was my roommate in graduate school, who would fit into that category. He's a mass murderer. His name is Bob Durst, in case somebody doesn't know who Bob Durst is. It's like we're not saying something that is secret or hidden. Who had a really rough childhood in terms of lacking being loved, that just wasn't there. He was raised by one nanny after another nanny after another nanny, rather than been in a strong family kind of situation. What if it had been a different situation? I don't know about we won't get into physiology here. We won't get into the brain. We won't get into talking about physical stuff, because the Course is not talking about something that's physical. It's never talking about something that's physical. Keep in mind, the Course is saying there is a mind, or the mind, and we're all a part of this mind, and it is formless. It doesn't have a form. It's not a physical thing. And yet we all partake of that. And not only do we all partake of that, we all know something about that. And so even in the case of a psychopath, let's keep in mind there's still a soul here. At some point, this body will disappear, because it does that for everybody, in case you hadn't noticed. And so on that level, then there's the mind. So where's the mind at, right? What the Course is asking us to do is to realize that we have split minds, that there is, if you will, two minds. But again, only one mind is real. One is an illusion. The ego is totally an illusion. The way the Course talks about this other mind is it talks about this as the coming from the Holy Spirit. So if you ask what the Holy Spirit is, well, you are the Son of God. That's what the Course in Miracles says, right? You are the Son of God, and that partakes wholly of that one mind, okay? Jesus simply represents somebody who became aware of the complete mind, the whole mind. So there wasn't a split, there wasn't a division, right? We're all already part of that mind, and who knows what it's going to take to break through to a mind that's very, very divided. Most of us are kind of split somewhere down the middle. By that I mean, we do give a little bit of attention, especially if you're a Course student, to God and to trying to do what's right and to doing the lessons and to learning. This is all about learning, right? As I've said in the past, the good news is your foot is on the path. I mean, you are working on this. You're doing this. So if you're doing the Course or you're doing other things that are similar to the Course, like a Course of Love or whatever else it is, or maybe other. I suspect everyone in the room has had a good deal of experience with quite a variety of inspirational material that you were studying before the Course in Miracles ever came into your lap, which means that you're already going in the right direction. You're already pursuing the goal, which is total self-realization, right? So Zhao had a moment of being able to see into that. We've all had moments of being able to see into it. She kind of held into it for a while. You know, it was more than a moment, right? That's possible for everyone. Okay. So let's go on. Let's get started on what we're talking about here today. And let me just we've got 40 slides. I never get through more than about 30. We don't have to complete this, but I do want to start a new topic in January. So I'm going to ask you during the first hour especially, kind of hold off. If you have a question, it doesn't mean you can't ask it, but kind of wait till the second session or make a note for yourself as to what it was you would like to talk about. And we'll talk. First thing I'll say when we come back at our break, when about an hour from now is, well, no, less than that, about 40 minutes from now, is are there any questions? All right, so let's get started. So here we go. So we're going to go inside and take a look around and see what insanity looks like inside. According to the Course, we're just talking about there's no one here who's not entered into insanity. So at the same time that there's no one here in whom the light has gone out completely, there's also no one here who isn't insane. Just the fact that you're here is, you're insane to be here. But as I said, those who are sane, who know heaven, stay home. You know, it's like, why do you want to go into that dark wilderness place that let's admit it, life is, it can be rough. It can be really tough. Just daily taking care of this body, for one thing, which can be a burden, dealing with other human beings, and you know, we're all in the same insane asylum, right? And we see it being manifest in lots of different ways. And our task is to maintain sanity in an insane world, right? And one of the primary points, I think I probably say this almost every week, is don't let anything take the peace of God away from you. But it's insane to let something like what's on the news in the evening take the peace of God away from you. And there's people who do that. There's people who are very, very upset about our current political situation, which means that they're willing to entertain that insanity. I mean, they're willing to look at it, but not able to look at it dispassionately. You know, they get caught in, they get plugged into it, like it's, and then they have lost their peace of mind. You know, don't give your peace of mind away. I don't care what it is. That's a major emphasis in the Course, right? Whether it's a small thing, what your mate said, big deal what your mate said, you know? I mean, it's just, it's okay, you know, let it go. It's nothing, unless you want to make something out of it, in which case it just makes it worse, you know? Which is what Ken is saying by don't make the error real. Don't jump on it. The ego likes to jump on the thing and start, now we've got an issue, right? Now we got a problem, which doesn't really have to be a problem. Not the basic task here is really leave the world alone or let it be what it is. So before we can attain a healed mind, we must recognize how insane we are. And the principle number 7, we studied the miracles principles a couple months ago. Miracles are everyone's right, but purification is necessary first. So what we're doing is first we're going to stop the insanity. What we tell kids when you go into a crosswalk, stop, look at your own insanity, right? And before you go forward. So purification is necessary first means that what we're recognizing is that there's some work that has to be done here. It's a kind of cleansing, purification. We're cleaning out, but what we're cleaning out is our misperceptions, our own mind, and not something else. Okay? So the ego isn't, by definition, this is from the Course in Miracles, this is a direct quote, right? The Course, the ego is insane, period. I mean, what, 4 words, right? By definition, it's insane. Right? So that's why we're all insane. Because there isn't anyone here that doesn't have an ego. And there isn't anyone here who doesn't experience temptation, the temptation to go along with whatever the ego is saying. It's okay to get angry. Big deal. You know, go ahead, cheat. I mean, nobody's going to notice. I mean, you know, tell a lie. What the hell? You know, it's just all of these kinds of things take us away from the mind. And the Course is trying to help us to become aware of the mind. Okay? In fear it stands beyond the everywhere, apart from all. Notice the terminology, everywhere, apart from all. We got capital E on everywhere and a capital A on all. In separation from the infinite, it is insanity. It thinks it has, in its insanity, it thinks it has become a victor over God Himself. This is the major problem. The major problem, the Course in Miracles says we all have is the authority problem. That's the major problem. Whose will rule? And in the case of someone who's psychopathic, for example, it would appear as though the ego has won, totally, 100% in control. So much so that this individual, my friend Bob Durst, winds up becoming a murderer, right? Because that's the defense. If you were to say something, fortunately, I never said anything wrong. You know, there was never a reason, but it was also about 15 years before he began his spree, right? Let's go on. And in its terrible autonomy, it sees the will of God has been destroyed. That's the idea, that it is destroying the will of God Himself. It dreams of punishment and trembles as it figures at the figures in its dreams. Its enemies who seek to murder it before it can assure its safety by attacking them. So we are really talking about an insane mind here, right? This is the way it And it's always, I'm going to add, always on the attack, always looking for a problem, always looking for dangers. This is how we wind up with so darn many wars in this world. We got a war after a war after a war after a war. And that is really insane. The moment it starts going out from just one person's mind to affecting the whole of the world. In my January-February issue of Miracles magazine, which is currently at the printers, I have a whole thing I talk about the Vietnamese War as an example, because that was also, some of you watched on PBS, a piece of incredible insanity that we engaged in. I was thinking about this last night. You think about, and the guys, I wasn't in Vietnam, I was exempt from, I was a minister and a graduate student at the same time, but they tried to draft me. Our fathers, all of the guys who were involved in that, right? Their fathers were in a war. It was called the Second World War, right? I mean, my God, it only 20 years later, how long could we couldn't allow for peace to exist. We went to Vietnam, we killed 4 is enough, million Vietnamese. And over what? Nothing. Over an idea, over a concept which turned out not to be true. That was it. So we're looking for this, and that's insanity. That way we would get over a concept, we would go crazy. So let's go on. So I said I'd mention Poe. What's interesting about Poe was that he doesn't really fit into the mystic category. On the other time, yet in part he does. The part that does is the inspiration that he could receive. I often say poets are often mystics and mystics are often poets, because there's something about, I know that Lynn here is a poet, any other poets in the room, that when you begin to get a poem, it has this way of kind of flowing, and it just seems to come, it just kind of comes. If you read like Poe's The Raven, is just the fact that that came out of someone. Once I sat and I won't begin that. Once upon a time when I was in college, I memorized the thing, but can't do it anymore. But there's pieces of it coming up here. And he talked about what he called the imp of the perverse, which I thought was a really interesting. We want to think about ourselves as being perfectible, but Poe did see this other dark side. Now, again, in his case, everyone he loved died. His mother and father died when he was very young, like a baby, never had no memory of them. The woman who adopted him died. Everybody dying from tuberculosis at the time. It was all over the place. It was very common, right? Then another woman who took a great deal of interest in him and tried to help him along died. And then his young wife died. So it was just like one after the other, everybody was dying. And so he was always looking for love. It wasn't like he was looking in the wrong places. He was capable of love. He could love very deeply, and he did love very deeply, right? But at the same time, it seemed like that it was constantly being pulled away from him, right? Why is it, he wondered, that we sometimes do the wrong thing almost in spite of ourselves, knowing that it's wrong? It's interesting because when you read, you know about his life story, you see that he had this way of kind of making the wrong choices and doing the wrong thing. He was a writer, he was asked to be a critic for a magazine. Well, he didn't believe in puffing. You know what puffing is? That's where you write really nice comments everybody does it, right? I mean, you look for people that make nice comments for your books, et cetera, et cetera. But he wouldn't do that. He would say what he thought about it. The consequence is that he made enemies rather than friends. It was like he was on that line, that very fine line of of kind of telling the truth, but he kind of went too far with telling the truth sometimes. I mean, like Longfellow, he really didn't like Longfellow. Longfellow was a beautiful poet, right? I won't keep this up. Let's go on. But we will look at this. So this is his looking. Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there, wondering, fearing, doubting, dreamings no mortal ever dared to dream before. This is from The Raven, right? So it's just this willingness to walk into this dark place that a lot of us would not walk into. So I've talked about the rest of this part here already. Let's go on. So let's skip topic now. This is part 2 of the Psychotherapy Pamphlet. It talks about the place of religion in psychotherapy. To be a teacher of God, it's not necessary to be religious or even to believe in God to any recognizable extent. It is necessary, however, to teach forgiveness rather than condemnation. Let's focus on this blue line for just a moment. It is necessary to teach. So what the ego does, we've already said this, the ego likes to find problems. And notice how often over coffee or tea or just sitting around chatting with friends, the conversation will turn to problems. Whether it's the politics or whether it's personal problems or but problems, right? The difficulties that are going on in the world. The task rather is forgiveness rather than, so forgiveness really simply means letting it go. It's so simple. It just means letting it go. It means not finding issues, not finding things that are going to be, the ego loves those kind of distractions. But not allowing for that, and to see in the minute, to hopefully, as you do the course, you should find that as you begin to see these insane thoughts coming up inside yourself, they're there, but as they begin to come up, you can catch it more quickly. And the more quickly you can catch it, the more quickly you can also let it go. And you can recognize, I don't need to go there. I don't need to talk about this problem or this issue. What I can do instead is just forgive it. And forgiving it simply means letting it go. I'm not making an issue out of this. It says, formal religion has no place in psychotherapy, but it also has no place in religion. Now, let's talk about what we mean by that, right? I'm going to try to do this on here as well. Okay, so laws, rules, creeds, beliefs, required ways of thinking, this is all blocks to open-mindedness. And the Course is really asking that we be open-minded. So, you know the 10 characteristics of a teacher of God that's in the Manual for Teachers of A Course in Miracles? There's 10 of them. We've looked at them once before, some time ago, a year or so ago. There's an order to them. And there's a reason why 1 is 1, and there's a reason why 10 is 10. And as you read through them, you'll understand what the connection is. And I talk about that in some detail in this book, Lesson 101, Perfect Happiness. There's a whole major section on each, a chapter on each of the 10 characteristics. The first one, we won't go through them all now, but I'll just talk about the first one and the last one. The first one is trust. So what we're doing is we're trusting that there really is a God. And the truth is that there really is a mind, which is one mind. And we're recognizing that we're part of that and that this mind is benevolent. It is truly benevolent. That's why it's forgiving. It only really wants to help you. The problem is, for all of us, we've got to be willing to be helped. We got to be willing to turn it over. Keep in mind, if the ego is the director, the ego likes to be boss. The ego likes to be on top. It always wants to be the top one, right? In whatever endeavor it is that's going on. I won't mention politics at the moment. But then it's interesting what the last characteristic is. The last characteristic, the Course says, and this is, now we're getting close to getting home if you get through all 10 of these, right? It's a process of one of developing each of these 10 characteristics. The centrality of open-mindedness. So open-mindedness is central to the opening of the mind. And notice what it says, perhaps the last attribute a teacher of God acquires. Isn't that interesting? It's the last characteristic. And what it means by, it means completely total open-mindedness, right? So when we say completely total open-mindedness, it really means that there's no one who should be exempt from your love. That's one thing, right? No one should be exempt from your love. That's why I have certain empathy and sympathy for Robert, because I knew him in a saner moment, right? Not completely, but so I could see. I remember the eyes. I remember looking in the eyes. I remember there's a soul in there. There's a human being in there, right? So it doesn't make any difference how insane that may have come out within the context of the world. And I wish I had the opportunity, but I don't, to step inside his prison cell and spend some time there. Because I think I could do it differently than probably what he's getting from a lot of other folks, right? Let me read this whole thing. So, is easily understood when its relationship to forgiveness is recognized. So forgiveness is saying that nothing's happened, right? Do you all know the story from the Bible of Jesus and the woman taken in adultery? Let me just review it. You probably know it. So they bring this woman to Jesus who's been, quote, caught in adultery. And they say, according to the law of Moses, she should be stoned. What do you say? And Jesus says, let the one of you who is without sin cast the first stone. Now the next line is a very interesting line. The next line is, and beginning with the eldest. Isn't it? Beginning with the oldest, they begin to drop their stones. So the oldest one there knows that he's not without what we call sin, right? So he drops his. And then that's an example. And then bit by bit, everyone does. And then they're all gone. And then Jesus looks at the woman and says to her, woman, where are your accusers? And she says, Lord, there are none. And he says, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. In other words, go and don't keep making the same mistake, right? There is no condemnation in heaven. That would be impossible for there to be condemnation in heaven, right? God does not think that way. There's only love. So let's go on to the next one. Oh, I'm on the oh no? In this world, there is an astonishing tendency to join contradictory words into one term without perceiving the contradiction at all. So formal religion is a kind of what the Course is saying is a contradiction in terms. Because real religion is an experience. As the Course says, so is psychotherapy. It's an experience. It's an experience of the opening of the mind. It's an experience of changing the mind. It's an experience in which you see things differently. But it is an experience in which, going back to the slide we were on a second ago, there are no laws or creeds or doctrines or beliefs or required ways of thinking. That's none of that. That is the moment we start setting up, and that's what happened with the church, as we all know. The church is inspired. In fact, as this happens time and time again with different mystics, the mystic will come up with an idea, they'll have an insight, they'll have a perception, and they talk about it, and then a group of people come along and say, this is fantastic, let's build a building, let's set up some books, let's write some books, let's create some laws, and there'll be certain things that people can do and certain things that people cannot do, and we'll hold them to those laws and those creeds, and now religion has formalized itself and become something that was never intended, right? Says it is obvious that the ego's attempt to reconcile the irreconcilable, that it hardly requires elaboration. And then I talked about religion and psychotherapy both being an experience. At its highest level, they become one. Neither is true itself, but both can lead to truth. Both the mystical experience and the psychotherapy can lead to truth. Because both bring healing to the mind. That's what we're concerned with. So if you have a mystical experience, that's going to bring a healing to you. You're going to be able to see things from a higher perspective, from God's perspective. But also the purpose of psychotherapy is to heal the mind so that it's not, quote, sick. So we said this, a true religious experience is transformative. Zhao's experience was transformative, right? It changed her. It changed her whole life in terms of what she was seeing before that and what she was able to see after that. A therapeutic experience, if it's a healing experience, should also be transformative. It should change the person. So they start seeing from a healthy point of view rather than from whatever that was that they were stuck. Right? Then I threw a quote in from Lewis Carroll, but I nearly forgot, you must close your eyes, otherwise you won't see anything. It's not about what we project. It's not about projection. It's not about seeing the world. It's about closing the eyes. It's about moving into prayer. It's about moving into meditation to really become aware. This is why we're going more deeply within, and this is why this is a part of every religious experience. So, as condemnation judges the Son of God as evil, open-mindedness permits him to be judged by the voice of God on his behalf. You all know about when we talk about the final judgment. You know what the final judgment is in terms of the Course in Miracles? The final judgment is, all is forgiven, come home. That's the final judgment. All is forgiven, come home. That's the prodigal son story. All that happens in the end is the father says nothing about where the guy went or what he did. Nothing. There's no issue. There's no problem. Nothing happened. Just forget about that. No. Don't worry about any of that stuff. That's all gone. That's all in the past. Get some sandals and put them on his feet. Get a ring and put it on him. Get a cloak and put it on him. Kill the fatted calf. Call musicians in. We're going to have a party. Right? Some Sunday school teacher once said, who was the only person that was sad to hear about the prodigal son's return, thinking the answer was the older brother? She said it was the fatted calf. All right, let's go on. So the real world is attained simply by the complete forgiveness of the old. Complete forgiveness of the old. The world you see without forgiveness. Forgiveness literally transforms vision. This is directly from the Course now. And lets you see the real world reach quietly and gently across chaos, removing all illusions that had twisted your perception and fixed it on the past. That's one of the things that see what one of the differences is that the ego is going to focus on the past, what you did, the mistake you made, right? That is unforgivable, whatever that is. And as long as we're focused on that, then we can't see the present. We can't see the wholeness of what's going on with that soul in the present moment. Right? And then if this happens, the smallest leaf becomes a thing of wonder, a blade of grass, a sign of God's perfection. Zhao?
I'm listening.
I know you are. You want to tell them about seeing the dog dung? I'm serious about this. Oh, yeah, she needs a mic. Tell about what happened when you went outside on the street.
Well, I saw a dog was pooping and I saw...
Is the mic on?
Yeah, it's not on.
Mic's not on, hon. There you go.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I went out for a walk and I saw a dog was pooping and but that was total reflection of God and I was amazed by that and I was shocked. I'm a neat freak. I'm really I am really. And so if you see God inside, it's everywhere, and the world is really a projection. There's a filter here and a projector here. Yeah.
So she's going on the street and she sees, I think even light was coming from the dog poop.
Everything was shining, perfect love, perfect God. Yeah. Yeah, I even saw people fighting on the street and I was saying, isn't that cute? They are playing, but...
Okay, so what Zhao is describing is simply here is something she said, she hated dung.
Who
Poop,
doesn't?
It was disgusting to see it on the street, and all of a sudden, with the eyes completely open, now she's seeing things. It's just a part of nature. It's just a part of the most natural thing that there is. Are a baby's diapers disgusting? Or they are what they are. And it's not disgusting at all. It's just a matter of perception. Thanks, honey. Okay. Let's go on a little bit further with this. So, I think I read most of this part here. Remove. If you're doing the workbook of the course, I think it's really early on, maybe 10 and 11. One of the workbook lessons is God is in everything I see, right? I think it's 10, could be wrong. And then the next one is God is in everything I see because God is in my mind. So there's a reason why God is in everything I see, because God is in my mind. If God is in my mind, so if I'm recognizing that God is in my mind, if that's my experience, what the workbook lessons are about helping us to have that experience. So that when you have that experience, you cannot be condemnatory. You can't be finding problems if everything is beautiful. Even a couple of people fighting on the street, right? So that's just a part of what's going on. Do you remember I told you once about Helen Schuckman's early experience when, I won't go through the whole thing, but on the subway, it's a disgusting, there were some men arguing down at the end of the subway on the car she's on, and she closes her eyes, she has this mystical experience, she opens her eyes, and she has the most profound love for everybody that's in that subway, including the two guys down at the end of the car that are fighting, right? That's a part of what's going on, right? It's like watching a couple of children fight. They're children that are fighting. This is not something we need to condemn anybody about. And it's not about who's right and who's wrong, right? Okay, let's go on. So the phrase, the real world, let's talk about the real world a little bit, is used 77 times in the Course. That's a lot. 77 times the real world. So let's talk about what the real world is. The real world is a state of mind in which, through total forgiveness, the world of perception is released from projection of guilt we placed onto the world. So let's go back and review just a little bit. So our basic problem, I said earlier, is the authority problem, but the basic problem behind that is guilt. And it's guilt because we all recognize that we're separate from the whole, and we feel guilty. This is existential guilt now. I mean, this is deep buried stuff that you don't think about. That we have actually somehow or another separated ourselves from God. That is, that we have somehow or another separated ourselves from the whole, right? And then we bury that so that we don't look at that. The world of perception is released from the projection of guilt. So we take our own guilt, and then in order not to look at it, the Course says we do one of two things. We project it onto the world, which is very easy to do. Again, we see a lot of that on the news. Or we project it onto ourselves. And when we project it onto ourselves, the consequences are depression, despair, and the Course would also say even illness. Physical illness becomes a part of what our experience is. So a healthy mindedness is really also is going to help us to have a healthy physical organism that we're working with in the world as well. We're literally, we use a phrase like, it makes me sick. Or discussing what, it's interesting, the phraseologies that we use. Why would anything make us sick, right? We're being literal about that, right? So, the ego is in the projection game. It's not willing to look within. Sees problems outside. It cannot look, you cannot be, this is a very important, the next line. You cannot be both projective and receptive at the same time. Okay? So you can't be projective and receptive. The Course is asking us that we become receptive. And that we become receptive to the guidance of the Holy Spirit. One of the things that Mary was asking in the question that she asked last time was, how do you know when you're in which state, right? Well, one of the ways that you know, an interesting, you can't tell what this is, but it says A Course of Love. When she talks about, there's a ending section here on channeling. Let me see if I can read you this little part about channeling. There's a big difference between seeing a teacher as a channel, all of life is a channel, and the self as a channel or channeler. Remember earlier I was talking about when poets often feel as though it's given to them. It's like you want to say thank you for, thank you for this. Well, the Course is saying that we all need to become channelers of the voice of the Holy Spirit. We want to be channelers of God's energy in the world. And the way that you do that very simply is just by being a loving, gentle human being. I was talking to a friend recently about Ken again, about major emphasis on Ken's teaching. Basic, central would be a very little word, kind. Kindness. Just the willing to demonstrate kindness or gentleness under all conditions and circumstances. So there's nothing that's you can't project. The idea is to start becoming a projector for the Holy Spirit because you are the Holy Spirit. You are the Son of God. It's the same thing as saying that you're the Son of God and that you're the Holy Spirit. Because who's Jesus? I mean, even if you look at the Jesus story, it talks about like when he's baptized by John the Baptist in the River Jordan, the Holy Spirit descends upon him, right? And that's a literal sense that they kind of talk about that. The Holy Spirit descends on him. Then he goes off for 40 days and 40 nights of wandering in the wilderness to do this deep inner search thing. And he comes out of that teaching. He'd never done any teaching before that. Then he comes out and he starts teaching. Because he went and became, as he says, it is not I who speak, but the Father who speaks through me. And that is the most, I know some of you have had this experience. It's the most wonderful experience. It's the most wonderful experience to find that the right words are there. Maybe in therapy, that as you're doing your therapy, the right thing to say will come to you. Or when you're writing, just exactly the right phrase. Or when you're just having a conversation with just exactly. And you feels good. It just feels like you're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing in the time and place that you're supposed to be doing it. Let's go on with this a little bit further. So, let's go to the next slide and talk a little bit more about the real world. So the real world is the end of the atonement. It is the undoing of the separation. That's the goal. The goal is that we get home, right? There is no separation anymore. So the Holy Spirit has now become so much a part of you that you can't talk without giving expression to that which is holy. The Holy Spirit speaking through you. Right? There is no ego that's in charge under those conditions. Then I think one of the ways that I answered Mary last time was to say, you know it when it begins to work in you. I mean, you know that it's real when you see it's happening. You see the right words coming out of your mouth. You see the right, not necessarily that, but the right action. You see a need and you're responding to the need and you're not thinking about should I respond to this need or shouldn't I respond to this need. You're just automatically doing it. I think it's interesting, people we call heroes almost always inevitably say, I just did what I had to do. I'm not a hero. It's just, there was the need and there was a response to the need. There was no should I or shouldn't I not do this thing, right? You just do it, okay? So it is allowing God to take his place in our life. This is a quote from the Course. All right. The great transformer perception, that would be the Holy Spirit, will undertake with you the careful searching of the mind. That's why I was emphasizing Poe's going inside and taking a look around. He was willing to go in there and to look at some really dark places that a lot of us wouldn't do that. That made this world and uncover to you the seeming reason for your making it. So there is no world in terms of the Course, because the world itself, don't take this too literal, we're not talking about the earth, okay? But we are talking about whatever it is that seems to be outside of us, right? There is no world because we're the projectors of the world. We create the world, we make up the world. And then we reinforce the world that we see. We say this is what we is, and we get other people to agree with us about our prejudicial point of view. And the more we can get reinforcement for that, the more it makes it real. That's why, again, one of Ken's major emphasis is don't make the error real. I mean, don't grab onto it and start amplifying it. Let's go on. The real world is the way that leads you to remembrance of the one thing that is wholly true and wholly yours. So we talked about this in the past as well. The whole task is one of remembrance, or a word I like better than remembrance is recognition. Bringing back into the mind what the mind already knows. You already know all this. So all that you're doing, or you're having a revelation. But it's interesting what happens when you have an insight or a revelation is that all you're doing is you're seeing something that's always been there. It's already there. And it's just like, sort of, it's like you're seeing it for the first time, but it's not for the first time because it's always been there. So you've always known this. You've always known God. You've always known heaven. You've always known the truth. How could you not? You're a son of God. So all you're doing is recognizing who you are in terms of your divinity and not being lost or caught up in some other kind of illusion. We'll do a couple more and then we'll take a break at 1:15. Okay. So no one who learns to forgive can fail to remember God. So it's really learning forgiveness. And when I say learning forgiveness, it also means practicing forgiveness. So that even on a very small thing comes around, you won't grab onto it as an issue. Forgiveness is all that's needed to be taught. That's all this whole Kin's foundation for our Course in Miracles had a logo. The logo was a stylized use of the word forgiveness around a kind of like a light, right? Because that was really the central message. All blocks to the remembrance of God are forms of unforgiveness and nothing else. So the real question is, why do I want to hold on to an unforgiveness? Maybe that person died. If you've still got a grievance about something apparent or something that happened a long time ago in a land far, far away and you're still holding on to it, then you're making yourself sick. Why would we do that? Yes, you're going to need a mic. Mic on this side, to the very back row. Over here, on this side. Just keep passing it back. Okay, Michael. Hi. Hi. Be sure it's on.
Hi. Hello? On?
No. We've always got to go through.
Okay, great. So it seems like in the Course, forgiveness kind of is fundamental. It comes first, and it leads to open-mindedness.
Mm-hmm.
However, it seems to me that it doesn't have to be that way. It seems to me that one could go in the other direction instead. It seems to me that if one becomes sufficiently open-minded and recognizes through logic or emotional purification or whatever path one takes, if one starts to become sufficiently open-minded that one recognizes that there's no need or there's no reason to be angry with anyone, there's no need to be upset with anyone, these people who are fighting with you or with each other are just being childish, they're like little children. They are misinformed and they're doing it out of ignorance or for whatever reason. And so there's no, in some sense, it seems to me that depending on one's state of mind, there would be no need for forgiveness at all. And then you could start with, then you wouldn't have to start with forgiveness. You could start with open-mindedness and start with just, the perception, a different perception of what causes people to misbehave or what causes problems. And if you have that different perception, then you don't even need forgiveness at all, and you can bypass forgiveness.
Right.
But that seems to be contradictory with the Course, which requires forgiveness.
No, that's not contradictory of the Course at all, and what you're saying is quite right. I mean, the real question is, why do we create something that would be an unforgiveness? Why do I even have the idea of unforgiveness? So you're taking a step back beyond that, which is a good step to the first part. Why see an issue? Why an issue? And over here on this side, that Mike's got to make all the way across the room to Stavros. And then we're going to have a break after this in a minute.
Well,
It's
just really
okay, Mark, you want to
yeah, it's just to
It's
answer
on
your
the way.
question, the reason why we have such a hard time with forgiveness is because that's what keeps the I going. That's all.
Did you all understand what?
It's very
he
easy.
said?
It keeps the ego going.
It keeps the
So
ego
it keeps the
going.
individuality going. That's the
Yeah.
only reason why we don't do it.
Right. So if we don't have the ego there in the first place, then there's nothing to forgive. Take a child, an infant, somebody pre-verbal, right? You could say all kinds of outlandish things about them to their face. And it would have no meaning at all, because there has to be a receptor who sees the problem, right? But if there's no receptor seeing a problem, then there's no problem. Stavro.
So I would agree with the first gentleman that what he spoke about is in contradiction to what the Course is teaching, in that forgiveness is a starting point, because if you're deducting and deciding on forgiveness, then it's in the realm of the ego, and that the ego is not the place to find forgiveness. That the whole point of
Right. So what I think the difference is, we're talking about forgiveness is a process. It's something that we learn how to do. It seems like we shouldn't have to learn how to do this. But the Course is teaching us how to do this, in part by showing us why it's so important, and by also showing us that we have this thing called unforgiveness, which is inside us, so we're also recognizing that, and then we're learning how to implement it. Right? But you're both right. Right? There shouldn't be a problem in the first place. But if there is a problem, then we need forgiveness. I want to finish this slide, and then we're going to take a break, okay? So this is why the function is forgiveness. We have to let it all go. There's nothing we're holding on to. Nothing. There's no hurt feelings. There's no disappointments. There's nothing to be upset about. Literally nothing can take the peace of God away from us, which has to be, it looks like, our major theme here. It's 2:45. We take a break from 2:45 to 3. See you in 15 minutes.